Thank you. Hello. You're
Hello.
welcome to the 2024 series of clay seminars and workshops convened by the Ceramic Research Center of the University of Westminster, UK, and the New York University in the US, the Indian Ceramics Triennial, and the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana. My name is Dr. Samuel Norty from the Ceramics Department of Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Ghana, and I'm your host for today's workshop. Today, we are going to discuss the theme sustaining practice. And I have two wonderful artists, Shobani Dagupta from India, who works in the US as well, and Frederick Ebenezer Okain from Ghana. Each of them are going to introduce themselves, and then our conversation will start. I think I'll let Shobani introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Sharbani Dasgupta. I'm from India, but I've lived and worked in New Mexico for the last 23 years, actually. But I come and go from India a lot. And I'm also part of the Indian Ceramics Triennale. I'm one of the curators on it. I'm a co-curator for the Indian Ceramics Triennale. I will try to share my screen and share and show you a few slides of my work. Start. So it was actually a good, interesting exercise to try and pick just 3 or 4 slides to talk about your work, especially because I tend to run off in many different directions. But this is an old piece of mine, and I think I keep coming back to it because it's sort of very central to my experience of living on the border. I live on a border. I came from somewhere else, so I'm an artist who's not from this border, but we've dealt with border issues in India for a long time. I live in West Bengal, which was partitioned, and one of my projects, which I will show you later on, also drew on those experiences of partition to work on later. So the wall and partitions and how we see each other when we impose a barrier plays a big part in many of my pieces of work. The other thing that I focus on, I'll talk about in a bit, but this was the project that came out of reading my grandfather's, actually my great-grandfather's diaries on partition. He was a clerk in a university, in a Nawab's court in what was then Bangladesh, and recorded many comings and goings of the people who were part of our freedom movement. And it was sort of written very much in a sort of free-flowing manner. He would record his daily family stuff along with sort of momentous things like saying Jinnah came to the court today. Jinnah was Pakistan's first prime minister. So anyway, so I reference these diaries for a project I did in Israel, which was talking about post-colonialism, very, very much still in the news today. And unfortunately, I don't see where it's going. But anyway, the project I worked on was on how, depending on our point of view, where we look from it, the land looks different. And this is now made in 2016, but it's still just as relevant. Again, talking about the border walls, this was now in 2018. I made this for the Indian Ceramics Triennale in 2018, which was our first Triennale. And I got lenses out of old televisions. And when you look through a lens, everything on the other side is upside down. So I created a maze with these eyes. And when you look through it, the person or the thing you see on it is upside down. So the image on the left is the installation as it was at the Triennale. And then I moved it to a friend's residency in Goa, where the forest has begun to claim it as part of its thing. And for me, it's like a benediction, watching the moss growing on it. And creating this other kind of being. This is the last slide that I have. It was part of an installation that I made, and it's called In Hindsight. So the other really big theme in a lot of my work is about the environment. And these pieces are made out of raw clay, and I filmed the movement of the clouds, which is very much a part of my life in New Mexico. The sky is very present. And so I was thinking about how land and how it, why can't I escape? How our relationship to land and each other. And so when the other day when I was trying to figure out, let me see, well, how do I make you not, okay, stop share. Yeah, so when I was trying to think about one word that would describe all these interests of mine, the word that the English word is kinship, how we relate to each other, how we connect to each other, how we connect to the land, the world we live in. And so for me, it's been really about trying to find a language that goes underneath, that connects us all, but rather than separates us. That's me. Frederick, your turn.
Whoa, that's interesting. Fantastic, Shobani. Thank you so much. Before I come to you with my first question, I would like to go to Fred. Fred, can you also take us through a few of your images and tell us what you do?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so my name is Frederick Benida Okain. I'm a multidisciplinary artist based in Sunyani, Ghana. My practice is largely experimental, and it takes the form of sculptural installations, video, sound, virtual reality, augmented reality. Basically, I like the idea to explore the plastic possibility of clay. But then my practice is also guided by my quest to seek ancestral wisdom. And through that, I play a role of a pseudo-ethnographer, moving from, community to community, especially community of poetry production, where I tap into the traditional repositories of knowledge, also into the tapestry of our culture. And I'm interested in the historical and also the archival. So my practice, I can say, also highlights the indigenous Ghanaian poetry, which have been practiced by our mothers, over centuries, without any form of recognition. And so it's a way of also, of interest for me. But then the pieces I make then become, a sort of a repository of stories, silent witness of the past while confronting contemporary concerns. So I think I mentioned that so for me, my practice or the pieces that I make, become sort of a repository of stories, where I confront contemporary concerns, yeah. And my practice, at least for now, I think, interrogates things such as coexistence, spatial relations, and form. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I'll quickly skip through a couple of images, and then so Efficacia is part of an installation of us within an exhibition I had in 2022. But this is a snapshot or a screenshot of a virtual reality, form of my work. So unfortunately I don't have that on my machine now, but then this is just to give an image of how the setup in the VR, was. And so you could also move in between the pieces, and they appear very monumental, once you have the headset on. And Obiara here is one of also the installation pieces within the exhibition setup. And Obiara here in English translates that everybody is important. So for this piece, I try to also talk about, issues of, Blackness, the politics of, the human body, the skin individuals, and several political concerns, which tend to divide us rather than bringing us together as people. And so within the exhibition setup, for this installation particularly, I collected ceramics objects, that have been imported into the country, and with some coming from the US, Europe, Asia, and also objects that I moved across the country to collect from different regions in Ghana. And I also borrowed the aesthetics of building a bridge where scaffolding is erected, and like the structure itself, and on how these connections, also become a point of reference, where I feel like to create the space for everybody, there should be that kind of, approach, where as people of the world, we tend to, create the structure that would rather put us together than dividing us as people. So within the same installation, I also made sculptures where I marry my training in the studio practice, which was greatly influenced by, a British interventionist project in the early 20th century, where Michael Cardio was sent to Ghana to establish the Ceramic Center. And so for artists like myself, this intervention really opened the space for my participation in the ceramic arena, because traditionally ceramics is a women-centered, space. And so I also, with this piece, I try to also harness on the importance of women society, where I reference my connection with my mother, and also literally tracing the ceramic tradition through the female landscape. And so as I said, I like to play around, create my own stories. And some of my practice also still connects with my environment, where I look at objects within, it could be natural, it could be artificial, but then around my neighborhood and my environment. And then I try to also tap into the aesthetics of some of these objects. So for this particular piece, there's a synergy of different ideas. So, but then the main focus was to replicate that of the butterfly, having a central body with some depictions on the sides, and still playing around form within the exhibition context. And so I'll skip also to this piece, which probably would be the last that I speak about now, titled "When the God Speaks, Heaven Listens." This was also shown in my 2022 solo exhibition titled, which was organized also as part of my PhD exhibition. And this particular piece, When the God Speaks, Heaven Lesson, also speaks to the reverence, that are given to women in our society. So I try to use my practice to highlight some of these, circumstances within the Ghanaian context. And so the ceramic vessel has two female sculptures at the top, where one sits on the stool. And traditionally, the stool is a symbol of authority. And so I try to speak about some of the cultural influences of women in society, where they, choose who becomes the king. When you need, advice and knowledge, you are being told to go to the woman or our grandmother, and never our grandfathers. And so I trace our ancestral roots, and then how also our great-great-grandmothers become deities who we pray to, to help us in difficult circumstances, to create this piece, which is now at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. Yeah. And so I think I would just go through shortly, and then yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fred. Two amazing artists, as I mentioned, and I can see the intersections. Shabani, you were talking about influence from your grandfather living on borders. Fred, you're also talking about community of poetry and tapestry, and now you like to play around with your traditional skills. I just want to find out, so when how Michael Cardew, a British potter, was able to influence one of your works and stuff like that. Maybe I'll take it from Shabani. Shabani, how can your work or how can clay provide access to and context for complex histories, like the way you've been moved? Can your work provide a context for us to understand complex histories? Shabani.
So, I was thinking about this because as just like Frederick mentioned, working with clay this way is not a traditional way of working with it. Every country has its, a traditional history, and each area in India, where I come from, is, along the river. So we have a lot of terracotta work. We have old temples built with terracotta. We have, the pot and clay is very central to many of our mythologies, our Hindu philosophies, and so it's very strong. When I first went back to Calcutta after studying with, in fact, Ray and Deborah, who in South India, it's interesting that for me too, the access to working with clay really in this way came through two foreigners who came to India and set up a studio and brought Japanese techniques of working with clay. So it's such a complex history already over there. And then as a woman, I was studying, and then I went back to Calcutta and I worked with the rural development thing, and wanted to work with potters who were losing their livelihoods because modern thing is just doesn't have place for terracotta in daily life. And working with them was an interesting overlap, because the reason they could listen to me was because I was not from that community. And so I was outside of that community. So we could work together because of that. Traditionally, their women do not work in clay. At the most, they might help to collect it. In South India, they actually help with processing and moving the wheel, but women don't actually make things over there also. Not in the traditional sense. So there are many overlapping histories that are coming through over there. And just as a personal point, which I forgot to mention when I was talking about, I was born in India, but spent the first 4 years of my life in Ghana, in Accra. And so when I came back to India as a 4-year-old, I was quite ostracized because I spoke with a Ghanaian accent. And so even though I spoke English, we had to, in India, we speak to each other. English is really the language that many people all over the country know, because we have 17 official languages and many dialects. So we speak to English and Hindi to some extent, but
That's
we don't understand
interesting.
each other's languages. So it was
Very
interesting to be speaking with a Ghanaian accent and be completely like, who is this strange girl? So it took some time, but I have this. That's why I was very excited about this opportunity to talk to you, because I have this feeling that someday I must go back to Ghana, and I want to, I have my childhood memories are there, or at least my mother tells me those are from Ghana.
Yeah.
But yeah, complex histories. And yes, clay can tell stories. And the way I use it is, it is the most common material all over the world. And it also bears the imprints of our oldest histories, all the shards, all the thing, they bring stories to us. So the histories that I get interested in are actually really primitive, prehistoric, so, because I feel that the world is so divided, I tend to want to use clay as a common language that we all understand. And I think anybody who works in the clay world has this instinctive connection to each other. We don't really need to speak the same language. And that's because of the ability of clay to carry the experience of being human, and within it, the stories of its histories. I don't know if I've made sense. I was blathering a bit, but
you have made sense. You have made sense. And I'm happy to hear that there's a connection, that you have been to Accra before. And as you ended, the center, the Ceramics Research Center in Westminster is championing this, our presentation as in CICA. We are talking about clay being a tool for conversation. And like you said, clay is powerful. You can understand. We get to understand our complex histories. And through this, I'm able to get that you have a connection to Ghana. Fred, in a minute, do you have anything? How does this provide access to complex history? I know clay has a lot of connection with our traditions and stuff. Anything to say about your practice, Fred?
Yeah, I think before 2017, even the kind of conversations about my practice was mostly aesthetic and all that. But then when I started tapping also into, the traditional knowledge system, researching from old theses, visiting spaces, and, having conversations with mothers who are practicing. And then, our histories are always relayed through verbal transmission. And so, yeah, I began to now, get some kind of knowledge and information, which for me wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't taken on this sort of research. And so I think clay, yeah, it has this power that you can only tap into it when you pay close attention to it, and then you also don't take the histories attached to them for granted. And once you do that, then you can begin to recognize the power of the material. I mean, in the aspect of these rich histories. Yeah.
Thank you. The power of the material. Now, maybe Fred, I'd like to start with you on this one. My next question has to do with how can works in clay encourage international influences to be recognized and then to be celebrated? How can our works encourage international influences to be recognized, and then that we can celebrate it. Maybe like to take a minute to answer that.
Okay. Personally, I feel like subjecting our works to like rigorous experimentation is one of the outlets for ideas, or working with clay, the products that become like seen, because the power of experimentation is such that it opens up the door of possibilities, and once that is effected, naturally that influence would be born out of the process. But then also like these experimentations have to also appear within exhibition spaces, and so like through that I think when we don't downplay the like the emergence or the emergencies that are that come out of these experimentation processes, then I am sure that through these explorative mechanisms, then people, like other people, will also pay attention to whatever we are doing, and then these influences can be seen or can be felt. Yeah.
It means that in a nutshell, you are saying that through exhibitions and stuff, these influences can be celebrated. Is that what you are saying?
Yes. I think I mentioned that is part. Yes.
Yeah.
But then, yeah. So we have to explore, like continue to explore, the immense possibilities the material offers in terms of the making process. And once whatever comes out also has to be seen, and so we have to show and yeah, like you rightly said, these influences can then be felt.
Okay, thank you very much. Shabani.
So this is something that I have thought about, because where I live here in New Mexico, it is probably the only state that has had continuous Native American population. They're Pueblo Indians, and they have not been moved from their ancestral land. The reason that they were able to stay was because New Mexico was originally occupied by the Spanish, and they said, well, if you convert, then we will let you live the way you want to live. So basically their faith went underground, and they had kivas which were hidden, and they would do their traditional ceremonies in there. And then now, of course, they don't have to hide anymore. But they use ceramics in a way that, they make pots in a way that's really ancient and traditional. And living here, you are impacted by the way they see the land, because after all, you are in their land, and then hopefully at some point you become part of it, even though I'm a transplant. But I carry with me the memories of my own country and where I came from. And I like to travel. I'm leaving in next week for a residency in China for 6.5 weeks. And this thing of how an international experience translates is one that in our cultural context today is a subject that we haven't found the answers to yet. Because though we can draw influences and inspiration from each other's ways of working with clay, our histories, things which resonate with each of us, you also have to be very careful about how you express that, because you do not want to be appropriating something. So yet we learn from each other, and we draw inspiration from each other. And sometimes it's a thing that's different that allows you to explore and grow in a way that you may not have seen possible in your own cultural context. So I think the international aspect is really important in being able to widen the understanding of how deep these knowledges are and how much they are part of it. But I think we're still finding the language of the way to move forward. At one NCC, I did a sort of a discussion, held a discussion about appropriation and what that means, and why you talk about appropriation, cultural appropriation. Yet as artists, we always draw inspiration from each other. I mean, Frederick, you're talking about your mother's role. I mean, that is a part, even here in the Native American community, clay is actually controlled by the women. It's a matriarchal societies that they have. And they express through clay. And that resonates with me, so it's yet in my own country, that's not true of where I was from, at least, so it was the men who control what clay does and what they make and what goes out and how it's used in our rituals. So it's all a thing of growing, I guess. I don't have the answers really.
No, you do. And that's what you are saying. And I believe it's the same thing in Ghana. I remember one of my projects, I think Fred also works on it. When it started, it was actually being controlled by the women. Then I think technology came in and the women were relegated to the background, just as maybe middle people just selling, and not as decorators of forming and stuff like that. And currently, I have one of my projects trying to bring the women in. And that leads me to my next question. I want you to start before I get to Fred. Then what do you think we can do? Because we've not actually recognized the traditional skills and techniques of these people who are the foundation of this, how we produce our works. So how can our artworks, or as a practitioner, how will you encourage a wider recognition of the traditional skills of the people you belong to, where you work, the native and stuff? How will we recognize their traditional skills and help them to maybe develop? This might be a bit personal. How would you do that?
I mean, the very first step is to verbally and in writing acknowledge what the work is and who is doing it and why it's doing and why it exists. I went to an amazing exhibition of art from Africa. I think it was called Out of Africa. It was many years ago in London. I still have the catalog. It's a massive one, and it covers work made in clay, in wood, in metal, all of these things. But the I think the context, the inability, or rather the difficulties, come because in Africa, like in lots of places in India and here in New Mexico, these objects that we made with love and with this thing, but not out of the context of the personal artist and as part of the cultural fabric. And they were used as part of our cultural fabric. And so the challenge is how to acknowledge the art inherent within it when our perception of art is outside of a cultural fabric or context. It's like it's the gallery or it's the space or whatever. So when we have a gallery, we have to take the responsibility of holding all those within that. I mean, Picasso, many painters, they drew their inspirations from what they call primitive art of Africa. It was never acknowledged. They became, these amazing painters who broke traditions and opened up paths. But if that acknowledgement had been in place, it would be very different, how we perceive it. So when we talk about Western art, you're not even talking about how the Western art has drawn from other traditional cultures. So it's I think acknowledgement is the very first step, and then recording and research as the this effort by the CRC to actually record all these conversations and have them there for those who are interested. One thing I've learned is if you're not interested, you cannot beat it into anyone's head. They need to be open. So it has to become part of our conversation.
Interesting. You made a very important point about Picasso and the rest. And I remember one of my research, I'm looking at traditional influences on Western practice or even contemporary art. And you could realize that even Andy Warhol and his silk printing were all influenced by a technique in Ghana, batik, tie and dye and stuff like that, and Modigliani and stuff. And I think you made the right point. Recognition is the first point, and then maybe research and publications it can follow. Well done. I think I like Fred. Can you?
Yeah.
How do you think we can recognize these traditional skills and techniques?
So for me, I am using it in other ways. Yes. So recognition, very important. But also I think in recognizing, the efforts and the role that they play, the idea of also giving reverence is also very important. And so in my 2022 solo exhibition, even though I made connections of the objects that I collected, I also partly saw the discrepancies that are mostly found in the Western museums, where you find these objects, but then there is an elimination of the producer. And so I did not want to also repeat, this situation. And so for my practice, for that particular exhibition, that exhibition actually happened in 9 interconnecting domes. And so one dome was dedicated to show the images, the information, who taught these women, their names, their age, who they have also imparted their knowledge to, so that the kind of recognition that they have within the space is goes beyond just generalizing their effort and their role in my exhibition. Also, I think as part of several projects that I'm preparing to work on, there is also the idea of a collaborative practice where, at some point, there's going to be projects that would not just also mention the contribution, but then would also see the participation of, some of my mothers who practice, the art. But I also think that also archiving and making proper documentation is also a good way of, addressing this particular issue. Yeah.
Yeah, we have we just came out of curating the Indian Ceramics Triennale this year, and our theme was common ground. So this was one of the, so we laid a lot of focus on things of, interpersonal collaborations and also overlap between different so-called media or different streams of knowledge. And this thing of collaboration is, the one has to be really conscious of, I mean, I use the word acknowledge, but a true collaboration really happens when you give equal respect and weight to each person's contribution to the project. And we ran into this many times, because especially when working with people who worked with rural artisans and creating a modern context or voice for them, but then they come through curators. So where is the balance of power? How much agency do they have? We tried. I don't know if we were able to find any solutions, but I think to some extent we will be able to bring their voice up into the again, I use the word up, but maybe up is the wrong word, but into a context where more people could see it and interact with it.
Yeah, I think in fact, that is the difficulty aspect of the idea of collaborative practice. And I haven't commenced the project yet because I'm still trying to politically be conscious of everything before that aspect actually takes place. But then it's very interesting you are also raising those up, because those are the very challenging aspects of, especially who dictates the final form, how you want it to be presented, so that it doesn't also appear to be something that you order people to do specific, take specific charge, and then you become the leader of sorts also, in that context. And so it is something I'm thinking of, something I'm working on, and I'm hoping that a balance can be arrived before the commencement of that aspect of my project. Yeah,
I think the way we came to terms with it is sort of that the intention comes from a real place, but it is not perfect, so we have to accept that it is imperfect, and maybe it's just one more step rather than the solution. Sorry, Sam.
No. That's why we're here. It's a conversation, and we have to keep on going, and it's interesting. And I find that you're all doing the same thing in different directions, but actually getting the same results. And that's why we've brought you together to listen to you. And my final question is going to be on how do we sustain practice? Our theme for this conversation is sustaining practice. So how do you use your specialty, your specialism, and to sustain practice? And how would that open windows for various dialogues and stuff like that? How do you sustain practice? Shobani, you take, and then Fred will end.
So I'm older than you, Frederick. So I'm quite a bit older.
Oh yeah, you're older than Fred. Okay, so Fred, you take it first, and then Shobani will end it for us, right?
Yes, you go.
Yeah, Fred, how will you sustain your practice and then your specialty? I know the way you wear your tapestry, your community poetry and stuff. How do you sustain that, and how does that open vistas for other dialogues?
Yeah, so I think being also a teaching artist, I am fortunate to have students who, are also excited about my practice. And then I have a number of them as my studio assistants. And so I think one way of sustaining the practice goes in that line. But then I've also noticed how, my exhibitions have connected me to people beyond even my landscape. So even in some neighboring countries who reach out to me via Instagram and conferences where they tell me about how my practice in a way is influencing, a greater part of their lives in terms of their practice and all that. And so I think one of the ways is to sustain, this practice is also to keep on exploring and playing around my material to a point that I can't make any longer. And so with that, then I know that at least a few number of people can also pick up and then move with it. One other way of sustaining my practice, especially that from the traditional, point, is also the idea of archiving, which is very important for me. And so archiving then becomes a system or a way of also keeping records of some practices which are also fading away in the country. And so yeah, it's also one of the, and not just like when I talk about archiving, I mean tests, I mean photography, I mean making videos, video documentations of practices, and also seminars and presentations like what we are doing now, is also a way of keeping records. And then I think it's also a very good way of sustaining the practice. Yeah. And so and so from July also I am taking on another approach where going to the primary school and the secondary school curriculum, we have ceramics as subjects which are compulsory for, especially with the basic school. And so I also plan with the help of my studio assistants to have sessions with these kids, fireworks that they make, and to build the interest right from the scratch. And who knows, at least one or two, a few people would decide to pick it up during the secondary school level and also probably through the tertiary. Yeah. So these are some of the ways that I see the sustainability of the practice.
Thank you very much, Shabani.
So what I was making, sort of playing around with, is sort of a thing of, the Mobius strip, and how I'm kind of fascinated by the idea that you can continuously move and you're on the other side of things always. So for me, a big part of sustaining my practice has been travel and, being able to engage with people face to face. For me, a Zoom meeting is wonderful, but it's the introductory stage. I have the most response when we are actually in the same room and can work together. So that really does sustain me. The different viewpoints. I don't only work with ceramic artists. I also have friends who are working with in other mediums, and just being able to connect with artists who are younger, doing different things, keeps me more flexible and forces me to stretch my own boundaries. And for some reason, they like to hear my stories. So I like to tell them some stories too, of where I got, this thing of being an outsider is also a gift. It's not just a difficulty. It is also a gift because it gives you, people hear you. They want to know what your stories are because you come from somewhere else. You bring something that they haven't seen. And so it's an interaction. I think of myself as a vessel that carries stories around and interacts, and I'm not the artist who's making the completely unknown, but I'm exploring all the paths that open up around me. So
thank you so much. And I think all the conversation leads to how we sustain our practice. Today we've learned so much from these two wonderful artists, and I think we must be grateful to the Ceramic Research Center of the University of Westminster, UK, for convening this in collaboration with New York University in the US, and then the Indian Ceramics Triennial in India, and then the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana. It's been wonderful listening to you, and we believe that such collaborations actually will help us to sustain our practices. From what we've learned from you, you allow your histories to inform what you practice and stuff like and more. And you believe that these works you are producing engage the community to rethink whatever they do to make the world maybe perhaps a more better place. We are grateful for your time spent with us. And we know that we can call upon you another time to have another interesting discussion on the way forward on our practices. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shobani. Thank you very much, Fred. Thank you very much, all those who join us online. We are grateful for your time. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.